Hi there, Team Delusional. I am back and doing more YouTube videos for you. I haven't done one in a couple of years, but I would really like to get back into it. I'm going to try to do one per week. I cannot promise that I will always be able to do that. It is a time commitment, but I'm going to attempt it. And I'm really excited to be back and doing these again. We've had a lot of really exciting stuff happen lately, and there's been a lot of craziness, of course, over the last 2 years with the pandemic and everything. But I really think that we are going to be seeing what we've been hoping to see for years now in the next, before the end of this calendar year. I really do think that we will. Okay, so to get started today, I want to talk about the pattern of the death fake outs. This is something that if you've been following me for a while, you are probably familiar with, but we are just going to go through them all pretty quickly here, one at a time. So the first thing it's important to know is that death fake outs are a huge part of this show, okay? Because we're dealing with people who die and then reanimate, the walkers, the zombies. Resurrection is just a huge, huge theme, okay? So it's not surprising that they would mess with it quite a bit in their storylines. I'm going to talk about 4 major death fake outs that happen to romantic couples and how these have been planned at least since season 4 when Gimple took over. Now, I will say that they are not by far the only death fake outs on the show. Pretty much every character who is good ends up having at least one mini death fake out. Okay, so one that comes to mind in season 4, we had Tyrese being left at the car and surrounded by walkers. And then, the characters just thought that, he had died and had kind of sacrificed himself to save them. But then a little while later, he kind of shows up, stumbles out of the woods, and he's actually okay. Okay, so they do things like that all the time. They have death fake outs that literally just a scene or 2 later are kind of resolved. And then they have death fake outs that go for several episodes. And of course, we know because of Beth and because of Rick, we have death fake outs that go for several seasons. Okay, so there's all kinds of different lengths and all kinds of different things they do with them. So it is kind of hard to nail down at times. But the one that I want to talk about is the ones for the couples. So I believe that back in season 4, when Gimple took over, there were 4 mainstream couples that were going to be a big part of the show moving forward. Now, not all of the people involved in those couples were actually there in season 4, but they were based on the most, main and loved characters. Okay, so we can kind of get a hint for who these couples were going to be based on something Beth said in Still. It is her famous line, "I am not Michonne, I'm not Carol, I'm not Maggie, but I made it." Okay, that's what she said. So she named 4 women, one of which was herself. Michonne, Carol, Maggie, and then Beth. I believe that those women are one half of each of the 4 death fake out couples. Okay, it's kind of a mouthful, but that's what I call them. So of course, we have Michonne and Rick is one. Carol and Ezekiel is one. Now, Ezekiel was not on the show in season 4, but they were already planning for him. Maggie and Glenn, of course, and then Beth and Daryl, everybody's favorite. If you are watching this movie, I'm assuming that they're one of your favorites. Okay, so this is something that Gimple had planned, and then he very quickly implemented it. We're going to go through each of these death fake outs, and I'm going to show you the similarities, and then I'm going to show you sequences that we generally see around them. And this will also tell you why I think that Zeke is going to get one at some point. All right, so the first death fake out, of course, was Beth. And it's really hard for us to show the sequence with her because she hasn't returned yet, okay? So it's not a full sequence yet. We're kind of in the middle of it, okay? So I will come back to her later on. But after that, the next one after her was Glenn. And we are, of course, talking about his death fake out in season 6. Please understand that I'm not suggesting that Glenn is still alive. Negan did kill him in season 6. Or, well, the end of season 6, beginning of season 7. But before that, in 6A, we had this thing where it looked like he died, but really he pulled himself under the garbage can and survived. And one thing that it's important to remember about that is that a lot of the same symbolism, including dialogue, like Glenn had a whole bunch of Beth's dialogue, okay? So there's a lot of the same symbolism around him that there was around Beth. So back when this was happening, the fandom, I remember, was pretty split down the middle about whether Glenn had survived or not. There was definitely a question of it because we hadn't seen his body. And in The Talking Dead, which is the talk show afterward, they kind of said, we don't know. I think they did put him in the in memoriam in case he was dead. But they said that. They're like, well, we don't know if he's dead, so we're going to put him in just to be sure, but we're not really sure. So there was definitely the question of whether he had died or not. And the biggest thing is that if there's any question at all, the person is probably still alive. Okay. Usually when someone dies, they show it to us very obviously. We see them get bitten. We see them get, really grossly torn apart by walkers, or we see them get beheaded, in like in Herschel's case. It's really obvious. So if there's any question at all, then usually that means that they are probably still alive. Okay. But my point was, the fandom was pretty split down the middle about whether he survived or not. And I looked at all the symbolism around him and said, well, okay, I don't know, obviously, but all the same symbolism is around him that was around Beth. So if Glenn is dead, then Team Delusional is screwed, okay? Because it would mean that we're interpreting that symbolism wrong and that Beth is not coming back because Glenn didn't, okay? But hey, looky what happened. Glenn came back, okay? So all of that symbolism showed that it was a death fake out and that he was actually going to return, which means that Beth will too. All right, so then we move into season 9. And of course, the next big death fake out we got was Rick's. And this was different from both Glenn and Rick and Beth because they showed the audience that Rick was still alive. Okay, so it's a death fake out for Michonne and Daryl and Carol and all of the rest of the group, but it is not a death fake out for the audience because we know that he's alive and well somewhere. However, we did have a lot of the same symbolism around him as we did around the first two. Okay, and like I said, I'm going to show you some sequences in just a minute that apply to all of them. So again, it's just kind of interesting. We see the same kinds of things, the same kinds of shots, and some of the same dialogue. And then there's the fact that it's a really big deal that there is no body, okay? With Beth, yes, I mean, people will point to the fact that Daryl carried her out of the hospital, and that is definitely true. But after that, we have no idea what happened to her. We did not see her get buried. We did not see her, anything really obvious to put her to rest in a way that is really, really convincing. And if you want to know more about why that's weird and the weirdness that happened after Coda and the 17 days, I have videos on those things and I will link them in the description if you want to find them. But once again, we don't know what happened to Beth's body. When Glenn went down under the dumpster, they didn't have his body. They didn't know what had happened to him, and I mean, even if he had died, he probably would have just been eaten by walkers and they would have never found him, okay? But that was clearly not the case. And then with Rick, they specifically, after that, did a whole sequence where Daryl and Michonne were looking for his body and never found it, okay? That is one of the major, major components of the death fake out. And finally, as I keep saying, I do think that Ezekiel will get one. He hasn't yet. And honestly, I did expect it sooner than now. But the thing is, we've learned recently a lot of things that have been going on behind the scenes that have a lot to do with COVID and things getting changed around. So I really don't think they're going to completely scrap the idea of doing one for Ezekiel. I still think he'll get one, but I also think that the timeline has changed and it's been pushed back. Okay, so we'll just have to wait and see if I'm right about that, but I really do think that he will get one. So let's talk about some of the things we see around each of the fake outs. The first one is lighting. They always do this thing where it's dark inside but light outside. So there's light coming in, but the inside looks really dim. Okay, we saw this around Beth at Grady. We saw this in the pet shop around Glenn. Okay, you'll see here that the lighting looks very, very similar. We saw it around Rick and Michonne in 7/12 when they went to the amusement park. There's a part where they are actually inside the school, and that's where I think that lighting took place. We are going to talk about 7/12 a little bit more here in just a minute. That was like a massive foreshadow for Rick's death fake out. And then around Ezekiel, we saw this really interesting thing in season 9 where they were in a movie theater. And there's a lot of reasons why I kind of point to this movie theater scene. One is that we saw a serious piggyback in the background, and that's what we saw around Beth and Daryl. And then there were a lot of really suspect things that we saw in this movie theater, including the lighting. Another thing we often see is cages. Okay, we saw a bird cage in Beth's cell. We saw one around Glenn. Of course, there were a lot of cages in the pet shop, but also after he was revealed to be alive in episode 607, we actually saw one hanging near his head when he was chasing Enid around. For Rick and Michonne, I've looked and I haven't noticed a specific bird cage necessarily, but if we're talking about a cage in general, when they went into that amusement park in 7/12, there was actually a chain link fence around the whole thing, and there were several different representations, if you will, of different types of cages. So there's that. And then we did see something similar for Ezekiel and Carol, a walker that was inside a cage in the movie theater. Another one that we should probably throw in, even though it's not one of the couple's fake outs, is Connie. Okay, Connie, this is more recent. We saw very specifically a birdcage near her in the mine before she disappeared. Then she was gone for a while. We saw a lot of similar Beth symbolism around her, and then she did come back. Okay, so she actually just recently came back, and she and Daryl reunited. So that's another, way that they have used that same symbolism. Another thing we often see is a candlelight dinner right before. So, of course, there's the famous scene from Alone when they have that candlelight dinner. We saw this one with Glenn and Maggie, and this was right before he went out to, do Operation Lead the Walkers Away in season 6 and had his death bag out. And then, of course, again, shocking, in 712, we had one for Rick and Michonne. I don't think we've seen this for Carol and Ezekiel yet. I did notice this season we've seen them eating meals together or drinking together quite a bit, and that could possibly qualify, but I also think that it's possible that they might do another more specific candlelight dinner scene for them. We'll just have to wait and see. If they don't, then I think some of what we've seen could qualify.